I don't think I know anybody who has not experienced some sort of abuse and some sort of, whether as a child or as a grown-up, in a relationship, on the streets, in public spaces, in private spaces. I do not know a single woman who has not experienced it. And when you live in that sort of culture, you start benchmarking yourself against Nirbhaya or something terrible that happened to somebody else and say, okay, maybe it wasn't that bad. What does this mean, it wasn't that bad? There is, you're almost being socialized to accept it. My name is Barkha Dutt. I'm 46 years old. I'm a journalist, a TV anchor and a writer. I am the daughter of S.P. Dutt and Prabha Dutt. My mother was a trailblazer journalist, one of the first few women journalists of her generation, and was also India's first woman war correspondent, something that is mistakenly used for me. She died when I was about 13. But that was enough time to be familiarized with what women have to go through, what women have to battle. So I'm saying I was brought up to challenge stereotypes from a very, very young age, and obviously it shaped my life in fundamental ways. But in some ways I feel that my freedom has really been given to me by my father. Yes, my mother was this fabulous role model, but my father left to bring up two young girls on his own as a single parent. I wouldn't have been able to be who I am if my father had not set me free, and my sister Bahar. When I wrote my book and I first spoke about having been sexually abused as a child, a lot of people asked me, why did you write it? Why have you spoken up after so many years? There were unkind and cruel people who said, oh, you're just doing this to sell your book. I even had to hear that kind of thing, which I'm only sharing because it gives you a sense of why people don't speak. My story is something like this, that my house, or the house I grew up in, was always a very open house. That's how my parents liked it. There were all manners of relatives, distant, far-flung cousins, always coming in, out. And for a while, there was a man who stayed with us, and he used to live on the terrace. And I was like a child. I was, I think, 9 years old or 8 years old, something like that. I was not 10 yet. And, initially he seemed like you'll always have some cousin of a cousin who'll take you on piggyback rides and twirl you around and give you chocolate and play with you. But this play with you became a metaphor for molestation. And what he would actually do is to say, come play with me. And I would go as this sort of unsuspecting child. And basically then he would place me on his lap and finger me, molest me, grope me, take off my underwear, touch me. And a few times I didn't understand, what this was. And this was well before children had been taught good touch and bad touch. We lived in another time. And something started not feeling right. I started withdrawing deep into myself, and I would not talk to my parents. And my mother was still alive, and she kept saying, what's wrong? And then one day I called her when she was at work, and I said, this is what this guy does, and it doesn't seem okay. Obviously, she came storming home, confronted him, threw him out of the house, told him never to come back. And I buried that somewhere very deep in me. And, it's strange how these things stay with you and how you recall them. Like, I recall it by smell. Abuse has a odor. Like, it's almost like that. And this is what happens to victims and survivors of child sexual abuse, that children feel that it's their fault, that it's our fault, right? Especially when it happens in the home, which is where it happens most frequently. Because it happens within what you consider to be a circle of trust, you feel like you're transgressing, or maybe you're just doing something, maybe you just crossed a line, maybe you've done something you shouldn't do. When you've had this kind of experience, it also scars you. And this is really important to say, and people don't talk about it because you think it's so commonplace, it happens, it's come, it's gone. No, it stays with you. And I am able to connect today as an adult that fear with what happened to me as a child. Families have to get over this fake notion of honor and self-respect. Like, that's really where it's at, right? I mean, what family ka naam or family reputation are you preserving when children in your family are being molested? So this notion of taking on the responsibility for keeping your family's reputation intact, this is what parents have to talk to their children, that this is not important. because he'll do it to somebody else and because it's not okay. So I just want everyone who's listening to this to understand a couple of things. This has happened to more of us and so many of us, more than you can imagine. As isolating as it can be, you are not alone. And the one way to maybe record what's happened to you is to tell one other person. I know it's really difficult to talk about sexual abuse, especially if it's happened to you when you were young, when you were a child at the hands of somebody you trusted. But you may find that at some point in your life, you are ready to tell your story. You are ready to go public with it. You're ready to maybe even pursue it legally. And at that time, it is important that somebody else knew. And the most important thing I want you to know is that it is not your fault. It is not your fault. And if you say that to yourself again and again, it is not your fault, you will realize that the shame and the humiliation is that of the perpetrator and not yours. So it's not your fault, you are not alone, and tell someone.